The rain fell in sheets that October evening, turning the cobblestones of Ashworth Academy's courtyard into a treacherous mirror of gray sky. 17-year-old Elena Morrison stood alone beneath the ancient oak tree, her threadbare jacket doing little to protect her from the cold. She clutched her books against her chest like a shield, watching through the Gothic-arched windows as her classmates gathered in the Great Hall for the annual Benefactors Gala, an event she had no business attending. Or so she'd been told. "What are you still doing here?" The voice cut through the sound of rain like a whip crack. Elena didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Marcus Aldridge, president of the student council, captain of the rowing team, and heir to the Aldridge fortune that had kept Ashworth's doors open for 3 generations. His footsteps echoed across the wet stones as he approached, flanked by his usual entourage, Victoria Chen, whose family owned half the tech companies in Silicon Valley, and James Thornberry, whose ancestors had literally helped found the school in 1847. "I asked you a question, scholarship girl." Marcus's tone dripped with the kind of casual cruelty that came from never having been denied anything in his life. Elena finally turned to face them, her dark hair plastered to her face. "I'm waiting for the bus. It doesn't come for another 20 minutes. "The bus," Victoria laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "God, Marcus, can you imagine? Taking public transportation." "I don't have to imagine anything," Marcus said, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the rain. "What I'm trying to figure out is why you're lurking around like some kind of ghost. The gala is for people who belong here. People whose families have built this institution. People who matter." Elena felt the familiar burn of tears behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. She'd learned in her 2 years at Ashworth that showing weakness was like blood in the water. "I wasn't lurking. I had detention with Professor Hartwell for being late to class this morning. The bus was delayed because—" "I don't care," Marcus interrupted, stepping closer. The expensive cologne he wore mixed with the scent of rain. "I don't care about your excuses, your circumstances, or your sob story about growing up in whatever trailer park spawned you. What I care about is the reputation of this school, and having charity cases hanging around outside our most important event of the year doesn't exactly scream prestige." "Marcus, maybe we should just go inside," James said uncomfortably, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear. "The headmaster's probably wondering where you are. You're supposed to give the student welcome speech in a minute." Marcus moved even closer to Elena, forcing her back against the rough bark of the oak tree. "I want to make something crystal clear. You might have fooled the scholarship committee with whatever bleeding heart essay you wrote, but we all know you don't belong here. This school is about legacy, about excellence, about maintaining standards that date back nearly 2 centuries. You're nothing but a diversity checkbox, a way for Ashworth to pretend it cares about economic equality while the rest of us foot the bill for your education." "That's not fair," Elena said quietly, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I earned my place here. My grades. Your grades." Victoria laughed again. "Please. Half the teachers probably give you pity passes. And everyone knows you're only in advanced placement classes because the school needs to prove that scholarship students can compete with real Ashworth students." Elena's hands clenched around her books so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I have the 2nd highest GPA in our year." "Because you have nothing else," Marcus shot back. "No social life, no extracurriculars, no family connections to maintain. You can spend every waking hour studying because your entire existence is pathetically small. While we're building networks that will shape the world, you're in the library desperately trying to prove you deserve to breathe the same air as us." Something inside Elena finally cracked. 2 years of swallowing insults, of eating lunch alone in the library, of wearing the same 3 outfits in rotation while everyone else showed up in designer clothes, of pretending she didn't hear the whispers and feel the stares, it all came rushing to the surface. "Why do you hate me so much?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I've never done anything to you. I stay out of your way, I don't cause problems, I just want to learn and maybe have a chance at a future that's better than the one I was born into. Why is that so threatening to you? Marcus's expression hardened into something cold and vicious. Because you're a leech. You're taking a spot that could have gone to someone who actually deserves it, someone from a family that has contributed to society instead of draining it. Every dollar Ashworth spends on your scholarship is a dollar taken from improving facilities, funding programs, and maintaining the excellence that makes this institution worth attending. You're a parasite, Morrison, and frankly, I'm tired of pretending otherwise. He turned to his friends, voice rising so that anyone within earshot could hear. In fact, I think it's time someone said what we're all thinking. You don't belong with us, he shouted, the words echoing off the stone walls of the ancient buildings surrounding them. You never did, and you never will. Go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of and stop pretending you're something you're not. The words hung in the air like poison. Elena felt them sink into her skin, confirming every insecurity, every moment of self-doubt she'd experienced since arriving at Ashworth. Victoria and James looked uncomfortable now, but neither of them contradicted Marcus. No one ever did. Elena opened her mouth to respond, though what she could possibly say, she didn't know, when headlights cut through the rain. A car was approaching, moving slowly up the long driveway that led to Ashworth's main entrance. But it wasn't just any car. Even in the rain and fading light, Elena could see it was something extraordinary. A vintage Rolls-Royce, midnight blue and gleaming despite the weather, the kind of vehicle that belonged in a museum or a diplomat's private collection. Marcus had frozen mid-gesture, his attention caught by the unusual arrival. The gala guests had all been accounted for, their luxury vehicles already neatly parked in the designated area. Who would be arriving now, alone, in a car that probably cost more than most houses? The Rolls-Royce came to a gentle stop near the oak tree, engine purring like a contented cat. For a long moment, nothing happened. The only sounds were the rain and the distant murmur of music from the great hall. Then the driver's door opened. The man who emerged seemed to materialize from another era entirely. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with silver-white hair despite appearing no older than his mid-50s. He wore an impeccably tailored three-piece suit in charcoal gray, a silk tie the color of old burgundy, and a wool overcoat that moved around him like liquid shadow. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic bones, with piercing gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But it was the way he moved that truly arrested attention. There was an old-world grace to his bearing, a sense of absolute confidence and authority that required no announcement, no introduction. He didn't demand respect. He simply assumed it as his due, and somehow that made all the difference. He opened an umbrella, black, elegant, with a carved wooden handle, and moved around the car with unhurried steps. When he reached the passenger side, he opened the door with a slight bow. A young woman stepped out, perhaps 19 or 20, with golden hair cascading over the shoulders of a designer dress that probably cost more than Elena's mother made in a year. She smiled at the silver-haired man with obvious affection and accepted his arm as they moved toward the watching students. Marcus had gone pale. Victoria's mouth hung slightly open. James looked like he'd seen a ghost. The silver-haired man's gaze swept across them with the precision of a laser, pausing on Elena, still pressed against the oak tree, soaked and shivering, before settling on Marcus with an intensity that made the younger man flinch. "Good evening," the man said, his voice rich and cultured, carrying the faint trace of an accent Elena couldn't quite place. "British, perhaps, but older, more refined. I do hope we haven't arrived at an inopportune moment." "And no, sir," Marcus stammered, suddenly looking very young and very uncertain. "We were just, that is, I was just speaking," the man finished for him. "Yes, I rather think the entire courtyard heard you speaking. Quite passionately, I might add." He tilted his head slightly. "Tell me, young man, are you a student here?" "Yes, sir. Marcus Aldridge, sir. I'm the president of the student council." Some of Marcus's usual confidence was returning, but it was a pale shadow of his earlier arrogance. My family has been associated with Ashworth for 3 generations, yes, I heard. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his tone made Marcus snap his mouth shut. How interesting. 3 whole generations. Why, you must feel quite established. Was that sarcasm? Elena couldn't tell. The young woman on the man's arm was watching the scene with bright, curious eyes. And you are? Marcus asked, trying to regain some control of the situation. The silver-haired man smiled, and it was not a warm expression. How rude of me not to introduce myself. My name is Alexander Ashworth. This is my granddaughter, Charlotte. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Ashworth. Alexander Ashworth. Elena's mind raced through everything she knew about the school's history. The Ashworth family had founded the academy in 1847, built on land granted by Queen Victoria herself. They had run it for generations, establishing it as one of the most prestigious private schools in the country. But the last Ashworth to directly oversee the school had died in the 1970s, and the institution had been run by a board of trustees ever since. Alexander Ashworth wasn't just any Ashworth. Based on the sudden terror in Marcus's eyes, he was the Ashworth, the patriarch of the entire family, a man whose name appeared on buildings and endowments, whose portrait hung in the headmaster's office. Mr. Ashworth, Marcus breathed, his face cycling through several shades of white and gray. I didn't know you were coming. We weren't informed, that is, the headmaster didn't mention. The headmaster doesn't know, Alexander said calmly. I dislike formality and fuss. Charlotte wanted to see the school where her ancestors walked, and I saw no reason to turn it into a diplomatic incident. He paused, rain pattering against his umbrella. Though I'm beginning to wonder if I should have. Tell me, Mr. Aldridge, do you make a habit of shouting at young women in the rain? Is this what passes for gentlemanly behavior at my family's academy? She's just a scholarship student, Victoria blurted out, then immediately looked like she regretted speaking. Alexander's gaze shifted to her with the slow precision of a gun turret. A scholarship student. I see. And that makes her… what, exactly? Less human, less deserving of basic courtesy. No, sir, that's not what I meant. Then perhaps you should consider your words more carefully before you speak them, Miss Chen. Victoria Chen. Ah, yes. Chen Technologies. Your father supplies our computer systems at quite a premium, if memory serves. Alexander's tone was conversational, but there was steel underneath. I wonder what he would think of his daughter's attitude toward those she considers beneath her station. Victoria's olive skin had gone ashen. Alexander turned back to Marcus, who looked like he wanted to melt into the cobblestones. Now then, Mr. Aldridge, let me make certain I understand the situation. You were, in your capacity as student council president, berating this young lady for… what, precisely? Having the audacity to stand in the rain? Waiting for public transportation? Existing while economically disadvantaged. I was just explaining that there are certain standards, Marcus began. Standards, Alexander interrupted softly, and somehow the quiet word was more frightening than any shout could have been. Standards. Tell me, what standard are you upholding by humiliating a fellow student? What legacy are you honoring by weaponizing privilege against those who have less than you? What excellence are you demonstrating through cruelty? Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. My great-great-grandfather founded this school with a very specific vision, Alexander continued, his voice carrying across the courtyard with the authority of a judge pronouncing sentence. He believed that education was the great equalizer, that intellect and character mattered more than bloodline or bank balance. He accepted students from every social class, a radical notion in Victorian England, because he understood that genius and virtue are distributed without regard for economic circumstance. He gestured toward the Gothic buildings surrounding them, rain streaming off the ancient stone. Every brick of this institution was laid with the understanding that we would be a place of learning, not a social club for the privileged. The Ashworth Scholarship Program, which has existed since the school's founding, was established specifically to ensure that deserving students, regardless of their family's wealth, would have access to the finest education available. Charlotte squeezed her grandfather's arm gently, but he shook his head. "No, my dear. This needs to be said." He fixed Marcus with a look that could have frozen fire. "You stand here, the beneficiary of your family's wealth and connections, and you have the audacity to suggest that someone who earned their place through merit alone doesn't belong? You, who were admitted because your grandfather donated a library wing. You dare to speak of worthiness?" Marcus looked like he'd been physically struck. "Let me be abundantly clear," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a register that somehow carried even more weight than his previous words. "This young lady," he gestured toward Elena, who was watching the scene unfold with tears streaming down her face, indistinguishable from the rain, "has far more right to be here than you do. She earned her place. She fought for it. She proved herself worthy through her own abilities, not through the accident of her birth." He took a step toward Marcus, and despite being a generation older, his presence was overwhelming. "You, on the other hand, have proven yourself to be a bully and a snob, a small-minded individual who mistakes inherited wealth for inherent worth. You are precisely the type of student my great-great-grandfather hoped Ashworth would educate away from such provincial thinking." "Sir, I apologize if I—" Marcus began desperately. "Oh, I don't want your apology," Alexander said, waving a hand dismissively. "Apologizing to me is meaningless. I'm not the one you insulted, humiliated, and attempted to drive away from an institution that has every right to count her among its students." He turned to Elena, his severe expression softening into something almost gentle. "My dear, I don't believe I caught your name." "Elena Morrison, sir," she managed, her voice hoarse from unshed tears. "Miss Morrison, would you be so kind as to tell me your academic standing?" I have the second highest GPA in the junior class, sir." "Second highest. How remarkable." Alexander smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "And what do you wish to study at university?" "Engineering, sir. I want to design sustainable infrastructure for underserved communities." "Noble and practical. Excellent." He turned back to Marcus. "Did you hear that, Mr. Aldridge? Miss Morrison wants to use her education to serve others, to improve the world. Tell me, what are your aspirations? To live off your trust fund? To take over your father's company through nepotism rather than merit?" Marcus said nothing, his face burning with shame. "Grandfather," Charlotte said softly, "perhaps we should go inside. You'll catch cold in this rain." "In a moment, dear." Alexander reached into his coat and withdrew a business card, which he offered to Elena. "Miss Morrison, this is my personal contact information. If you experience any further difficulties at Ashworth, any difficulties at all, I want you to reach out to me immediately. Do you understand?" Elena took the card with trembling fingers. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "It's I who should thank you," Alexander said warmly. "In my experience, those who must fight hardest for their opportunities often emerge as the most capable and compassionate leaders. Ashworth is privileged to have you as a student, regardless of what certain small-minded individuals might think." He turned back to Marcus one final time. "Mr. Aldridge, I will be speaking with Headmaster Pemberton about tonight's incident. I suspect you'll find the next few weeks rather character-building. Perhaps some time spent in service to those less fortunate than yourself will provide perspective." "Yes, sir," Marcus whispered, looking utterly defeated. "As for you, Miss Chen, Mr. Thornberry, Alexander's gaze swept across Victoria and James. "I suggest you carefully consider the company you keep and the values you choose to embrace. Ashworth has produced prime ministers, Nobel laureates, and humanitarian leaders. It has also produced fools and wastrels. The choice of which category you fall into is entirely your own." He offered his arm to Charlotte again. "Now then, shall we see what all the fuss is about regarding this gala?" As they walked away toward the great hall, Charlotte glanced back at Elena and offered a warm, encouraging smile. Then they disappeared through the massive oak doors, leaving the four students standing in the rain. For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence following Alexander Ashworth's departure felt heavier than the rain. Marcus stood frozen, his face a portrait of humiliation and barely suppressed rage. Victoria had wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly interested in her designer shoes. James was the first to speak. "Marcus, I think we should—" "Shut up," Marcus snapped, though the venom had gone out of his voice. He looked at Elena with an expression she'd never seen on his face before, uncertainty. For the first time since she'd arrived at Ashworth Academy, Marcus Aldridge didn't know what came next. Elena clutched Alexander Ashworth's business card like a lifeline, rain blurring the embossed letters. She knew she should say something cutting, something that would drive home the fact that she'd just been validated by the most powerful person associated with their school, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she felt drained, exhausted, as if the confrontation had taken every ounce of energy she possessed. "I need to catch my bus," she said finally, her voice flat. She walked past them without waiting for a response, her soaked shoes squelching against the cobblestones. Behind her, she heard Marcus let out a string of creative profanity that would have earned him detention if any faculty had been present. What the hell was Alexander Ashworth doing here? Victoria hissed. Nobody said anything about him attending the gala. "He said he didn't tell anyone," James replied. "Marcus, this is bad. This is really, really bad." "You think I don't know that?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea what my father's going to say when Ashworth calls him? Our family has spent decades building our relationship with this school, and I might have just destroyed it in 5 minutes." Their voices faded as Elena reached the front gates. The bus stop was just outside the school grounds, a simple metal shelter that did nothing to protect against the horizontal rain. She sank onto the bench, finally allowing herself to shake, from cold, from shock, from the overwhelming weight of everything that had just happened. She pulled out her phone with numb fingers and typed a quick message to her mother. "Going to be late. Bus delayed. Love you." The truth was more complicated, but her mother had enough to worry about between her 2 jobs and taking care of Elena's younger brother. She didn't need to know that her daughter had been verbally eviscerated by the school's most powerful student, then unexpectedly defended by a man whose family name was literally on the buildings. Elena looked down at the business card again, carefully protecting it from the rain. The cardstock was thick and expensive, with simple engraved text. Beneath that, in elegant script, was a handwritten addition. "Sometimes the measure of an institution is not its age, but whom it chooses to exclude." Fresh tears stung Elena's eyes. In 2 years at Ashworth, not a single person had made her feel like she belonged. Not the teachers who were always faintly surprised when she performed well, not her classmates who treated her like invisible furniture, and certainly not the administration that had accepted her scholarship application but done nothing to integrate her into school life. And then a man she'd never met, who had every reason to side with the wealthy donors who funded his family's legacy, had appeared out of nowhere to tell her that she deserved to be there. The bus finally arrived 20 minutes later, its windows fogged and interior overly bright. Elena found a seat near the back and pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the lights of Ashworth Academy fade into the distance. She wondered if Alexander Ashworth realized what he'd done tonight, not just defending her, but potentially painting a target on her back. Marcus Aldridge didn't strike her as the type to take public humiliation gracefully. The rumors started before first period the next morning. Elena arrived at school early, as she always did, to avoid the crush of luxury cars dropping off students who lived within walking distance but couldn't be bothered to actually walk. She usually spent this time in the library, getting a head start on homework or losing herself in books about structural engineering and urban planning. But today, as she walked through the main corridor toward the library, she noticed something different. People were staring at her. Not the usual disdainful, dismissive stares she'd grown accustomed to. These were looks of curiosity, surprise, even a few that might have been respect. Students whispered to each other as she passed, phones appearing in hands with suspicious speed. Elena's stomach knotted with anxiety. What had happened? She got her answer when she reached the library and found a small crowd gathered around someone's tablet. They scattered when they saw her approaching, but not before she caught a glimpse of what they'd been watching, footage from last night's gala. "Elena! Wait!" A voice called out behind her. She turned to find Sarah Chen, no relation to Victoria, as she was always careful to point out, hurrying toward her. Sarah was one of the few students who'd ever spoken to Elena without outright hostility, though they couldn't quite be called friends. More like friendly acquaintances who nodded at each other in the hallways. "Have you seen it?" Sarah asked breathlessly, holding up her phone. "Seen what?" "The video." "Oh my God, Elena, everyone's talking about it. Marcus Aldridge getting absolutely destroyed by Alexander Ashworth himself." Sarah's eyes were wide with excitement. Someone recorded the whole thing from the Great Hall windows and posted it to the school's private forum. It's already been shared like 500 times. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Someone filmed it? Not just the argument, the whole thing. There's this moment where Marcus is literally speechless, and Alexander Ashworth looks at him like he's something stuck to his shoe, and then he gives you his personal card and… Sarah paused, studying Elena's expression. "Oh, you didn't know people were recording." "I need to go," Elena managed, turning away. "Wait! Elena, this is good news. Don't you see? Everyone's on your side now. The comments are all about how Marcus is a bully and how cool it is that Alexander Ashworth defended you. People are saying." But Elena was no longer listening. She pushed through the library doors and made her way to the back corner where she always sat, her sanctuary, her safe space. She sank into the worn leather chair and tried to steady her breathing. This was worse than the original confrontation. So much worse. Before, her humiliation had been relatively private, witnessed by Marcus and his friends, maybe a few other students in passing. Now it was entertainment, a viral moment. Her worst experience at Ashworth turned into content for people to consume and comment on. She pulled out her own phone with shaking hands and navigated to the school's private forum, a supposedly exclusive platform for Ashworth students that everyone knew was monitored by approximately no adults. It took her only seconds to find the video. The footage was shaky and partially obscured by rain-streaked glass, but the audio was devastatingly clear. She watched herself being cornered by Marcus, heard his cruel words, witnessed her own pathetic attempts to defend herself. Then the arrival of the Rolls-Royce, the emergence of Alexander Ashworth, and the systematic dismantling of Marcus's entire worldview. The comments section was exactly as Sarah had described, hundreds of students weighing in. Finally, someone put Marcus in his place. "Did you see his face when Ashworth said his great-great-grandfather was disappointed? Dead." Okay, but can we talk about how Elena Morrison has apparently been dealing with this garbage for 2 years and nobody did anything? The scholarship students deserve more respect. Elena has a higher GPA than like 90% of Legacy admits. Marcus's dad is going to lose it when he sees this lol. Anyone know who Elena Morrison is? I've never even noticed her before. That last comment stung more than it should have. She'd been at Ashworth for 2 years, maintained a near-perfect GPA, and a fellow student had literally never noticed her existence. She was simultaneously the main character of the school's biggest drama and completely invisible. "Miss Morrison?" Elena jumped, nearly dropping her phone. "Mrs. Lancaster, the head librarian and one of the few staff members who'd always treated her kindly, stood beside her chair with an expression of concern. "I'm sorry to startle you, dear. The headmaster would like to see you in his office." Elena's heart sank. "Now?" "I'm afraid so. Don't worry, you're not in trouble. At least, not that I'm aware of." Mrs. Lancaster offered a gentle smile. "For what it's worth, I saw the video. What Mr. Ashworth said was long overdue." Headmaster Pemberton's office occupied the top floor of the oldest building on campus, a converted medieval tower that predated the school itself. Elena had only been here once before, during her initial scholarship interview, and it had been no less intimidating then. The headmaster himself was a rotund man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard and spectacles that perpetually slid down his nose. He gestured for Elena to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his massive oak desk. "Miss Morrison, thank you for coming so promptly." He pressed his fingertips together, studying her over his glasses. "I suspect you know why you're here." "The video," Elena said quietly. "Indeed, the video." Pemberton sighed heavily. "In my 30 years as an educator, I've dealt with countless disciplinary issues. Vandalism, academic dishonesty, the occasional inappropriate relationship. But I've never had to navigate a situation quite like this." "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't ask for any of this." "No, I don't imagine you did." He turned his computer monitor so she could see it. The video was paused on a frame showing Alexander Ashworth's stern expression. "However, we now find ourselves in a rather delicate position. Mr. Aldridge's father has already called twice this morning, making threats about withdrawing the family's considerable donations to the school. Mr. Ashworth, Alexander Ashworth, that is, has also been in contact, expressing his displeasure with the school's culture." Elena's hands clenched in her lap. "Am I being expelled?" "Expelled?" Pemberton looked genuinely shocked. "Good heavens, no, child. You've done nothing wrong. If anything, you've been remarkably restrained in the face of behavior that should never have been tolerated." He paused. "That said, I need to understand the full scope of what's been happening. The video shows a single incident, but Mr. Ashworth suggested this was part of a larger pattern. Is that accurate?" Elena didn't know how to answer. Telling the truth might make things worse for Marcus, which would undoubtedly make things worse for her. But lying seemed impossible when Alexander Ashworth had so publicly called out the school's failings. "Miss Morrison," Pemberton said gently, "I promise you that any information you share will be handled with the utmost care and discretion. But I cannot address problems I'm unaware of." So Elena told him. Haltingly at first, then with increasing confidence, she described her 2 years at Ashworth. The social isolation. The subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination. The way teachers sometimes seemed surprised when she knew answers in class, as if scholarship students weren't supposed to be intelligent. The comments about her clothes, her background, her very presence at the school. She told him about finding her locker vandalized with the words "charity case" spray-painted across it. About the group project where her teammates simply excluded her from meetings and then claimed she hadn't contributed. About the time someone had stolen her bag with all her textbooks, forcing her to explain to her mother why she needed money for replacements they could barely afford. By the time she finished, Pemberton's face had gone through several shades of red. "I see," he said finally, his voice tight. "And you reported none of this to the administration?" "I reported the locker incident, sir. I was told it was probably just a prank and that I shouldn't take it personally." Pemberton removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Who told you that?" "Dean Harrison, sir." "Of course he did." The headmaster stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Morrison, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, in fact. Ashworth Academy has failed in its fundamental duty to provide you with a safe, supportive learning environment. We accepted your scholarship application, we celebrated having you in our admissions materials, and then we left you to navigate a hostile social landscape entirely on your own.
Sir, I don't expect. Perhaps you should, he interrupted, turning back to face her.
Expect more, that is. From us, from your peers, from the institution that claims to value excellence in all its forms. He returned to his desk and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. I'm going to ask you to write down everything you just told me, along with dates and any witnesses who might corroborate your experiences. This will not be used against you. Rather, it will inform a comprehensive review of how we handle scholarship students and address bullying at Ashworth.
Elena's eyes widened. A review.
Mr. Ashworth was rather insistent. And frankly, after seeing that video and hearing your account, I agree with him.
Changes need to be made.
Pemberton offered her a pen. As for Marcus Aldridge, he will be facing serious consequences. I've already suspended him from the student council pending a full disciplinary hearing. His father's donations notwithstanding, we cannot tolerate that kind of behavior from anyone, let alone our student leadership. A knock at the door interrupted them. Pemberton's assistant poked her head in. I'm sorry, headmaster, but Alexander Ashworth is here. He says he wants to speak with you and Miss Morrison, if she's willing. Elena's pulse quickened. She'd assumed last night would be the last time she saw the man who'd so unexpectedly defended her.
Show him in, Pemberton said, straightening his tie.
Alexander Ashworth entered the office as he'd entered the courtyard the previous night, with an air of absolute authority that required no announcement. He was dressed more casually today in gray slacks and a navy cashmere sweater, but he somehow still looked like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine for distinguished gentlemen.
Headmaster Pemberton, he said, shaking the older man's hand.
Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Miss Morrison, good morning. I trust you made it home safely last night. Yes, sir, Elena managed. Thank you for asking. Alexander settled into the chair beside hers with the ease of someone who'd never been uncomfortable anywhere. I've been reviewing the situation with my attorneys and the Ashworth Foundation Board. We have several concerns regarding the school's current culture and its adherence to the founding principles laid out in my great-great-grandfather's original charter. Pemberton had gone slightly pale. The Ashworth Foundation controlled the school's largest endowment. Mr. Ashworth, I assure you we take these matters seriously.
Do you?
Alexander's tone was mild, but his gray eyes were sharp. Because from where I'm sitting, it appears that Ashworth Academy has drifted rather far from its mission. My ancestor founded this school to be a meritocracy, a place where talent and character mattered more than pedigree. Yet here we have a student who earned her place through exceptional academic performance being systematically harassed for her socio-economic background. I was just discussing this with Miss Morrison, Pemberton said defensively. We're implementing a comprehensive review. Which is admirable but insufficient, Alexander interrupted. Headmaster, I'm not here to have your job. I'm here to ensure that Ashworth remains worthy of bearing my family's name. To that end, the Foundation will be taking a more active role in school governance going forward. The headmaster looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant.
What did you have in mind?
Several things. First, mandatory anti-bullying training for all students and faculty, with special emphasis on socio-economic discrimination. Second, the creation of a peer support system for scholarship students to ensure they're adequately integrated into school life. Third, a review of admissions policies to ensure we're not giving undue weight to legacy status over merit. The board will never approve that last one, Pemberton said weakly. Legacy admissions are a perpetuation of privilege that undermines meritocracy, Alexander finished. Yes, I'm aware. Which is why the Foundation will be making its continued support contingent on meaningful reforms. The board can choose to accept money with conditions or find alternative funding sources.
I suspect I know which they'll choose.
Elena sat in stunned silence, watching this man systematically reshape her school's future because of what he'd witnessed in a rain-soaked courtyard. It felt surreal, like she'd stumbled into someone else's story.